Very nice to hear that SNCF is a now a dynamic player, and I can choose that your profile is different of the one we have of SNCF, just between you and us. So tell us what you think about the big change into urban transportation today, and probably thanks to new data, we just mentioned that, a new application. Tell us what is changing.
So thank you for saying that my profile is different between us and 200 people and the internet. And that makes me feel comfortable, so thank you. Just before I answer your question, what I do at SNCF or what we do with my team, I'm head of e-voyageurs SNCF, and e-voyageurs SNCF is everything that's digital and client.
CEO.
I'm the CEO of e-voyageurs SNCF. So,
which represents quite a billions.
Well, it's we SNCF. For those who are French or know the French, so it's we SNCF. It's Rail Europe, which sells European train tickets to non-Europeans, and our SNCF app, which is a mobility as a service app. And this business is a 5 billion business, and there's approximately 2,000 of us, and half of those 2,000, 1,000 of them are engineers, developers, AI specialists. So this is which is sort of atypical in the train world or in the industrial world to have such a big digital factory. Going back to your initial question, what we're doing, and if we focus on what we call mobility as a service, is that after listening everything that was said this morning, we believe at SNCF that a lot of the solutions to mobility issues will obviously come from infrastructure changes, and this is why we're developing the RER, this is why we're still investing in their network. But in today's world, that's only half of the solution, and we do believe that the second half of the solution will necessarily be to give access to those new mobilities. So we were mentioning bikes, scooters, alternatives to our trains. And this is why when we have a mobility as a service app, we go as far as to integrate competitors to SNCF or partners. For instance, we announced yesterday that on the app, we will be selling RATP and Transilien train tickets, or the Navigo Pass, which is the urban pass for Paris, even though a large part of those tickets don't go to our business. We also announced that we will be selling scooter rides where you will go as far as booking. We were talking about parking lots at some point. I don't remember who said that. Obviously, if we want people to get rid of their car, well, they will have to park it. So we will also offer a possibility to park on the app, and that's very important to us because
so
we need.
Talk about assistant, right?
That's mostly
downloaded.
That's on the assistant. Yes? Absolutely. So
I've got it. Yes.
So thank you for downloading it.
It allows. I check it. It allows to share with bikes, with buses, alternatives. When I move to train to other.
This is exactly
what we call a transit, or we call it intermodal.
What we want it to be, and what it's becoming, is an intermodal app. The fancy word is mobility as a service, and maybe we should all agree not to use this term anymore because it's been used so much. But what we believe is we need to have a marketplace of mobility on the app that gives people the right itinerary, the possibility to book, and obviously the possibility to purchase, because that is the alternative to the car. I mean, why are cars so great? Cars are great because, and they're easy, because they're very practical. They can get you from point A to point B.
And you can have a package.
You can have, exactly, you can have luggage, you can have 3 kids, you can be on your own. And this is why, if you look at the stats, the share of cars in our transport is actually not going down. It's still 82% in France, which is a massive, which the 82% of rides that are above 100 kilometers are still by car. So it hasn't changed, whereas people made so many efforts to change things. So that's actually a pretty mediocre output if you look at all the effort that was put into it. So part of our job, and if you look at cities, if you look at the level of congestion in cities, the level of congestion in cities is actually going higher. So even though there's a plethora of different supply, scooters, bicycles, and so on and so forth, people haven't found a solution to make their rides easier and faster within a city. So this is why we believe that a large part of the job, and again, it's not the sole part of the job, but the large part of the job needs to be done by the digital players.
So it means that you have been opening to other players, like BlaBlaCar or
Well, there's BlaBlaCar. I mean,
scooters companies.
Scooters. Once we probably can't have 12 scooters.
Do you deal with Uber? No.
We will deal with Uber.
You will?
Yes, we will. We will. And why are we dealing with
No
Uber?
exclusive. No exclusive.
Well, there's no exclusive. What we need to do is, we need to look at what people are using. And in today's world, I mean, we can't, we're not going to change the customer to make the customer agree with what we do. That doesn't work anymore. So, the customers change. We can try to influence them. We can try to orient them in some sort of in a direction. But at the end of the day, if there's such a success in those alternatives, there's a reason why, and we need to be part of that game. And we can't just, we can't function as we're not an Amish village. We can't just say, well, the world isn't changing and we just want to live in our world and we're the specialists of a world that no longer exists, because, the world will no longer exist if we go on in this direction. So we need to open to partners, even competitors.
Interesting point you mentioned to me, that you have to think the city not only the center, but the suburb. Again, we talk about the ring, but the couronne, you say in French.
Yes, I mean, there's a paradox, because there's a lot. Well, there's a paradox when we look at our figures, and this is why data is so important, because and it sort of clarifies a lot of assumptions that people have. But there's a lot of work being done on city centers. There's a lot of excitement about bicycles because it's cleaner, because it can make you healthier. But the truth of the matter, if you look at a region like Paris, you do have company headquarters that are growing like mushrooms in the outskirts of Paris and suburbia. So, the world we live in 20 or 30 years from now won't be the same. The Paris region will function as a big city. The RER Line E, which will be one of the biggest semi-metro, like a metro line for the Paris region, will really bring one point, which is seen almost as the countryside, to the center of a city, as if we were commuting between a suburb and its city. So that's one thing. The other thing that people don't really acknowledge, especially in public transport authorities, is that the way people move is actually more complex or more sophisticated than what people would think. A lot of the transport is done with a philosophy of commuting between the center of the city and the suburb. If you look at how people move, that's not how it works. You have people, and we have those in our stats, we have people who actually live in a small city, have their kids' school in another small city, go to the doctor in a third small city, have their accountant in another small city, and have a job in another city. So nothing is really thought in this way, and we need to find solutions for these people. And this is where there's a lot of talk about data, but if you really want to be, data are just facts that are put in a mathematical form. If you look at this, you have access to what people are actually doing.
Is it really open, or we talk about that? Open data is okay, but there is also what we call sort of threat of the GAFA, right? Do we talk about that too?
I mean, yes, there is a threat. There's a threat. We need to be careful, because Google is the Goodwin point of any conversation about digital. So Google cannot necessarily do everything. So we need to be careful when we mention it. That being said, however, you have these players that are in a fantastic position to gather and structure the mobility data better than anyone else, and if they can help, that's great, but we mustn't be naive. And when I say we mustn't be naive, we need to look at what Google selects as a point of interest, for instance. We had an interesting case at hand in Paris where points of interest for Google are businesses or commerces, but if you look at the Sen banks, for instance, they're not a point of interest. So that's interesting to understand, especially for the PTAs, because that means that what people will be looking at, public transport authorities, les autorités organisatrices de mobilité, Steve, for instance, you need to understand that what Google's interest, and that's in their DNA, and I'm not judging, is actually to put at the forefront commercial interest rather than other interests. And I don't mean this in a demagogical way. I'm just saying that this is a reality. So this is one thing people we need to understand, that if they have access to all the data, if they structure the data, if they build the data, if they give the data, then there's a structural element of your sovereignty as a PTA that you're actually giving up to a third player. So I don't mean to, draw a bleak picture of what's going on, but that's a reality, and this is the reality of today. So that's my first thing with governments. The second thing with governments is, why are, other players so good? Well, and why is Google so good? Because they're faster, and they don't ask themselves so many questions. And I think another point, more on a political level, is I think we need to, and that's our responsibility at SNCF. It's the responsibility with the PTAs. It's the responsibility of RITP. It's the responsibility of any players to understand that there's probably more at stake than having turf wars between one another, and actually understanding that this is one of the key issues of mobility in the next 10 or 20 or 30 years.
And another question is how to be consistent, to be coherent between sustainability, you start with that, and business development. It's time that these new players coming up, even with competition with startups, etc. But how can we deal with that? You talk about governance. What do you feel about it? Maybe personally.
How do I feel personally about the consistency between business and environmental issues?
Yes.
I think that's a question anyone can ask themselves. So I don't know how you feel about that,
No,
but
won't tell you.
no. But I think when you work at, if you have a leading position at SNCF Group, and if you're working for what is a national company that is actually moving people around 5 million a day,
Yeah.
Your interest is you want the company to be solid, but your interest is a little different than getting people to click on an ad at the end of the day. So you try to get people to move. When we're investing, I know it's not today's topic, but when we're investing in digital applications for low-density areas, believe me, there is no business model at all, but we do it because we believe it's our DNA to do this kind of stuff. And actually, it's an interesting point, because we're talking about cities, and I don't want to get out of I don't want to change topics, but what's going to happen in the next few years is that there will be fantastic mobility as a service apps for big cities. There's no question about that. The question is, will it be Uber? Will it be Google? Will it be Citymapper? Will it be us? Will it be a number of those? But that's how it's going to happen. If you look at the low density areas, no one is taking care of those because there is no business model. So you need to have companies whose interest is to take care of those.
Yes, you need to be proactive, to help, to subsidize some way?
Well, you need, yeah, I mean, there are different modalities. I'm not the one to say whether it should be subsidized or not, but for instance, so, this is very far away from Paris, but when we did an experimentation in Haute-Vienne near Limoges, which, sort of accumulates, so it's a low density area in France, it's rural, there's no fast train access to it, and it's a condensation of all the problems, all the mobility problems you have in low density areas. We heard a lot about those in the last year. There were a lot of demonstrations. So what we did over there is we just, we saw the prefect, we saw the député, the member of parliament, we saw all the local political leaders, and we asked them to bring all the mobility players, whether they're cab drivers, whether they're people driving school buses, people that don't necessarily have this mindset, but we said, look, guys, you probably have what we call in our jargon an inventory of mobility. So you have cars driving alone and empty, and we can probably do something like that with that. We can put it together, and we can give access to people who have mobility issues and give them an alternative to driving solo in their car.
How do you feel about authorities together? Because we have the Grand Paris, we have Paris Metropole, we have the mayor of Paris. It's complicated in Paris. How do you feel you can deal with that?
It's
with data behind.
It's baroque. It's strange sometimes because they're not necessarily aligned. We definitely don't want to get into any political discussion because
it's not the case, but
we care deeply about each one of our partners and we work with them. So that being said, I think that
are you sharing data?
We are sharing data, and we need to be sharing more and more data, and we need to focus not only on sharing the data, but in the right format of the data. I don't want to get technical, but when we look at what we're doing, actually, think of the format of data as different languages. It's sort of as if one were written in Latin, the other one in Greek, and the third one in Hebrew, and no one has a translation module. So we need to work on that, because we don't want to just have data to have data and say, well, we have a data strategy. We need to make sure that people can actually do something with that data. So we need to go in that direction. Same thing for ticketing, same thing for NFC. All those technical things are actually end user issues. So we shouldn't look at it on a technical level, but we should look at these things and say, well, which one of these things makes our end user happier and makes their life easier? Because otherwise, it's going to end up being another big theoretical public program. And while we're having these discussions, well, the ones you mentioned, whether they're Google or Apple or Citymapper, are moving faster because they don't ask themselves those questions. So there's really an issue between private players that come from the market, and we think they're good because they create some stimulation, but they're moving at a speed where other public transport authorities or the regulatory rhythm can't follow. Just to give you an example, in France, there's la LOM, la Loi d'orientation des mobilités. It's going to take approximately 4 years between the beginning of the discussion and the moment when it's implemented and executed. That's 4 years. If you look at, there have been 24 versions of the iPhone since 2007. There are 2 million different apps on on an iPhone. So we cannot, this is just the iPhone, so we cannot continue this way.
Time scale is different.
Time is our enemy for these things. It's the enemy, and in all sense of time, it's the enemy of the users of transport, because they waste too much time in inefficient transport, and this is time that's taken away from them, and it's also time that's taken away from the economy. So it's a terrible thing to take time away from people, and it's also time is also an enemy when you look at our world, our technology world, because while we're wasting time having political discussions, the rest of these players are moving, and they have other interests. That's what I was saying about Google a few minutes before.
We have 2 minutes left, but it's a key point.
Time is our enemy.
It's really tough to talk about time's schedule, because you are in the new generation of startups, as I mentioned, the new profile of SNCF, which is impressive to us.
Well, there's 2,000 of us, so we're not a startup.
Yes, but where do you see some disruption or not? I was aware about when you created the platform. With my students, I was showing SNCF as an example of moving. It was moving very quickly, and today you are really digital. And but where were the main disruptions, you think, in the structure?
In the SNCF structure?
Yes.
So, no, I think what was strong about SNCF in 1999 or 2000, it was its ability to really have spaces, free spaces or safe spaces where you could experiment stuff. And it started with voyagesncf.com, which people thought at the time was an alternative to the Minitel. So I don't know if anyone here is French enough or old enough to remember what a Minitel is. They're one person, but it was or maybe two. But that's what happened. And then that's how it started. And then there was the e-commerce wave, and it was a fantastic way to actually know your customers, have some data, and market. I think the second revolution was definitely what happened on the mobile. The revolution we're going through right now is complicated to explain, but we're going beyond e-commerce. When I'm talking about itineraries with real-time data and real-time itineraries, where we're talking about putting together different modes of transportation, when we're talking about booking standards, those is a big revolution. So the profound transformation through digital tools, and I know it's a little fake, everybody talks about digital transformation, so I don't want to go in this direction, but the truth of the matter is you have today technology that can really change the way people travel, the way they go from point A to point B. That was everybody's dream for a while, and I think there's an opportunity here to make it real, only if we do it in the right time.
This is the last word. In fact, we're on time. Just to finish on that, time is our enemy, you said. You are late about sustainability, which was our word. So what do you think? Are you thinking still enthusiastic, or do you think you just try to gap the delay, or?
So no, I'm a pessimist. So this is and I look and I
positive
think
pessimist.
I'm a positive pessimist.
Constructive
so you need to,
pessimist.
The glass needs to be half empty if you want to fill it. So that's that's how.
Okay, that's a good word to finish. Thank you very much, Alexandre. Good luck. Nice job.